we'll do our best here virtually. I'm Marco Bay, Executive Director of Lomakatsi Restoration Project. We have an office in Southwestern Oregon and also in Northeastern California. And before I continue on, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Belinda, introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Belinda Brown. I'm the Tribal Partnerships Director with Lomakatsi Restoration Project and also chair the Intertribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnership. It's good to see everyone.
So thank you for the intro, Lindsay, and the invitation. And we are excited to engage further with East Cascades Oak Partnership. I've heard about your work for many years. And recently we're, over the last year, engaged in a conversation around some oak habitat around the Brave Buffalo Sundance ceremonial grounds on the Mount Hood National Forest, where we are in day 2 of implementation through an agreement with the Forest Service and through partnerships with the intertribal community. So we figured we would center it around our tribal partnerships program, because that's what brought us to the East Cascades, and a little bit about our organization. We're a nonprofit organization based in Southern Oregon. In January, we'll be celebrating our 30th year in operation. We work throughout Oregon, Northern California. We do have some projects in Idaho and partnerships in Nevada, but most of our work is in Southern Oregon and Northern California. Our mission is to restore ecosystems and the sustainability of communities, cultures, and economies. So a triple bottom line approach to our work, looking at not just ecosystem resilience, but social justice, socioeconomic development, and really trying to build a restoration economy, thinking about long-term capacity for implementation of landscape scale restoration, whether it's oak habitats or sage steppe habitats that we work in, to dry forest habitats, to riverine systems. So I'm putting this slide up because we were fortunate over the last several months, really the last 6 months, working with our partners in the Forest Service and the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, other DOI agencies, National Park Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the BLM, to establish these longer-term agreements to deploy Indian Youth Service Corps. And today is actually the first Indian Youth Service Corps, starting yesterday, project in Region 6 of the Forest Service. And it's in the East Cascades at the Brave Buffalo ceremonial grounds. So we have 13 tribal members on the ground today. Met with the Forest Service archaeologists yesterday. We've been on the ground with Lindsay and Kat from ECOP, Columbia Land Trust, and the intertribal community, our friends from Warm Springs Reservation, Warm Springs Tribe. And finally, after putting these agreements together and launching this effort, we're starting out with a 23-acre project. So Belinda, if you want to talk about Indian Youth Service Corps for a minute, that'd be great, what we're doing to bolster capacity.
Right. Indian Youth Service Corps was mandated through Secretary Deb Haaland in 2019, and it's just now hitting the ground. So we have a multi-regional agreement with the Forest Service to implement Indian Youth Service Corps, and also with National Parks, master participating agreement with National Park Service to implement this Indian Youth Service Corps across the nation. So that is 18 to 30-year-olds that are trained, equipped, empowered in all the certifications they need for a natural resource career path. So they come out with their first aid, their CPR, their incident command system, 100, 200, 700, their SAW certs, their wildland fire certs, their cultural monitoring certs, and we're working on wilderness first responder and the cert, the Community Emergency Response Team certification. So this is an on-ramp camp to natural resource career path. Once they get 640 hours in regards to the Public Land Corps Hiring Act, it's a Public Land Corps certificate for 640 hours of conservation work. Then they get ability to come into USA Jobs and have preference rather than having to compete. So this is a real win-win for our communities 18 to 30 is a good age, up to 35 if they're veterans, that we can equip these young people with the skill sets and with the certifications they need to accomplish this work.
So the photograph you're looking at there was just a little over a month ago within some oak woodlands in the Applegate Valley, where we were putting fire on the ground through this program with the Bureau of Land Management as part of our partnership. And this photo here was at the Table Rocks, for those of you who know what that is, in Southern Oregon. Lomakatsi, in partnership with the Klamath Bird Observatory, many of our partners, federal and state partners, through the Klamath Oak Network, have been implementing work on the Table Rocks and adjacent private lands through the Klamath Oak Network and through different agreements since 2012, when Quezon was birthed. And this is a photo from a couple months ago of intertribal workforce putting fire on the ground after treatments, ecologically based thinning treatments of oak stands, and finally getting fire back on the ground. So most of our work has been centered in the oak universe down in southwestern Oregon, but also working in Northern California with the Aju Maui Atsege Nation. A lot of work with ecocultural fire and strategies. The tribal community that we're engaged with down south in California, they don't have a formed oak working group, but their community has been restoring oaks for many years, decades, and obviously tending and caring for those oaks for thousands of years. So those partnerships exist. They're not formal, but great work is happening. But in this setting, through Quezon, I think you've heard about the Klamath Oak Network as one of the oak working groups. We're currently managing an OWEB FIP with the lead convener and science delivery partner, KBO. And then Lomakatsi's capacity in this team is to provide our foresters, our ecologists for technical assistance work, implementation. So implementation through our in-house tribal workforce and our multicultural workforces, and then administering a cadre of contractors to scale up and get this work done across federal and private non-industrial lands. So a lot of history with this organization, this team, and then bringing that capacity for A to Z NEPA work, which we've been doing across the geography. This is a team of co-selected band members. We do a lot of Section 106 National Historic Preservation Act work in partnership with our federal partners, and then with archaeologists to move the needle on NEPA and get some good projects on the ground. So providing that technical capacity, that implementation capacity. This is the workforce up at Mount Hood today. You're looking at the team here that are implementing the project. And then we implement this through our Tribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnerships program and the Intertribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnership that Belinda will talk about. And this provides opportunities for tribes and tribal communities at invitation. It's a comprehensive approach to that ecosystem resilience and workforce capacity development work, addressing those impacts to those terrestrial and aquatic systems, and thinking about long-term capacity and employment. So at Lomakatsi, we employ 92 FTE currently, and we also support tribal businesses, tribal corporations that are doing this work in partnership, and then work with our federally and non-federally recognized tribal partners, and then traditional community members as well in this effort. So these 5 related initiatives, we work in form those strategic partnerships, we secure those long-term collaborative agreements, and then assembling and training that tribal workforce to build that capacity and create that restoration economy, the forest-related enterprises. So even out of our oak work, we're sending logs to the mill, and that's what we do through stewardship agreements with the BLM, the Forest Service. We can actually generate revenue from the byproducts of habitat restoration work, and then recoup some of those revenues back into more restoration, including prescribed fire, noxious weed work, ecological monitoring, other things we can do as part of that activity. So I'll turn it over around ITERP.
So the Intertribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnership was birthed 2016, 2017 in response to tribal needs throughout the region. And Lomakatsi, a Hopi word that means life in balance, We go where we're invited. So we had tribes inviting us from all over Oregon and Northern California to come help them with their restoration projects. And the banner of the Intertribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnership encompasses all of those tribes that we have those project initiatives with. So in order to build some of these project initiatives, it comes down to really dry work, and that's the work that we've been doing so far, putting agreements together for this Mountain Hood project and working in partnership with ECOP. It's all about building relationships and trust and partnerships in a community, and without those relationships and without building that trust, that we don't get past go. So I'm sure all of you in this room know that collaborative aspect about getting this work done, combining all of the resources we have, working smarter with the resources we have as a team, and especially when you don't have constituency, when you don't have the voters in some of the rural frontier areas that we work, or tribal communities that we work. We need to come together with political will. We need to come together with MOUs, mutual aid agreements, and all the paperwork and templates and contracts and agreements that we need. So that's one of the purposes of the Intertribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnership. And we have a tribal advisory committee on a project by project basis that advises us all along the way. And where we're working in the tribal ancestral areas of certain tribes, we are very careful to hire those tribal members from those areas to work on their ancestral lands, incubate businesses for those tribes, and be sure that we include the community members also of the area, so that they get the project work done and they have best value preference and Indian preference for some of the work that is implemented.
So Belinda talked about interagency partnership agreements. Lomakatsi currently has about 26 agreements with the Forest Service, multiple agreements with Fish and Wildlife through the Partners Program that helps with our oak work, and then partnership agreements with the BLM as well. So establishing those agreements for long-term implementation, providing that co-investment to center that ecoculture restoration. So working in that context of engaging with tribal governments as invited, but really with the community members, traditional leaders, other tribal organizations, and then economic development corporations, and then our federal, state, industry, and NGO partners, and some of our elected leaders to scale up this work. It's been the model that we've been rolling out the last 15 years, and it's part of what brought us to the Mount Hood community, but then that careful engagement with the federally recognized tribes of that geography. And then utilizing stewardship contracting. We were a part of this legislation back in the late 90s during the timber wars, when it was owls versus jobs on the west side, and a lot of polarization. How do we create that restoration economy and use best science, indigenous traditional knowledge, and then have the mechanism to collaboratively implement the work once we have a decision and we've come to a zone of agreement? We can turn that over, but if we're going to have a good ecological end result on the ground, we needed a framework, and Stewardship Authority gave us that framework to work in partnership with our federal partners and tribal partners, but then to layer in this community revitalization and workforce development component. We have to bring matching dollars to the table. That requires a pretty active fundraising team in our ranks. As you all know, we're developing grant proposals. We're bringing this as a business partner of the agency, not as a contractor. We're collaborating. We're helping to raise the money, like you see with the OWEB FIP grant that's being managed under ECOP. We have a dry forest FIP down south. We're on our third FIP at Lomakatsi. We were kind of one of the guinea pigs of the initial FIP rollout. And what a great funding mechanism and opportunity through that focused investment partnership. So these stewardship agreements, they create that legal mechanism and the framework, and we're almost to the finish line of a Region 6-wide master stewardship agreement that gives us an opportunity to develop supplemental project agreements with specific NEPA, develop that NEPA or utilize that NEPA that's been developed, and develop financial plans to get that work done. These are some of the agreements we currently have with our tribal partners. We've been invited. Some of these are in California. Just wanted to give you kind of a flavor, and I won't do death by PowerPoint here, but show you a couple examples, and then we'll wrap up out of respect for the time of the meeting. One example is the Ashland Forest Resiliency Stewardship Project. We're in year 15. We're looking at late successional reserve here, dry forest ecosystem, a lot of oak mixed in with some of this geography on the private land side. And we have a wildland urban interface issue, wildland fire, forest resiliency, protection of ecosystem services, and late successional habitat. We do this through this partnership arrangement, but this can be couched within a larger partnership that's broader, like a ECOP has, or the Rogue Forest Partners or CASON. But certain partners can enter into these agreements, and these agreements are 10 to 20 years. So they give us longevity to build capacity. And we've been selected for some national awards or national funding awards. You could see that quintessential WUI, densification due to lack of fire, lack of cultural fire, lack of lightning being able to burn in low intensity. Now we have densification. As you all know, the issues, stress-related mortality, like we see across the landscape and across our wildfire crisis strategy areas, like in the Mount Hood, large old trees. So we've built these all lands initiatives from federal land to private non-industrial land. And how do we strategically utilize the resources to affect fire behavior and restore ecosystem resilience? We've done this through this initiative. We've identified 52,000 acres, and we've treated about 28% of that landscape, and 14,500 acres treated. A whole suite of partners. Each partner has a different role, and our role is really implementation, ecological monitoring, workforce capacity, communications and outreach to get this work done, managing very controversial projects that have an ecological end result using best science, but with a lot of community buy-in. Actually, removing 14 million board feet in the community of Ashland took years of social license. And these are the small diameter logs to create resilience around our old trees, and then regenerate that revenue. We regenerated $6 million. That doesn't go back to the Treasury under stewardship agreements. It actually gets co-invested back into more projects, more workforce development, more training opportunities. And these are some of the contractors that we manage in this initiative, providing that capacity and that scaling up when we need it, keeping our workforce in-house, relatively nimble, about 6 crews that could put fire on the ground, that can oversee burn planning and implementation, and then a lot of community engagement to build that social license, but also that understanding and engaging youth and young adults in this process. So you'll see the model kind of replicate in different agreements with different partners, different ecological conditions and limiting factors that we're trying to address, utilizing that local workforce, restoring those forests to a resilient state, and with tribal partners at their invitation to a government-to-government relationship. We've been able to replicate this model, many different stewardship supplemental project agreements, building that capacity in technical, contractual, and implementation oversight. So here's a different business model that you see on federal lands. We're monitoring the treatments, we're laying out the units, we're writing the prescriptions, we're doing cruise and appraisal, and in many cases helping with NEPA, serving on ID teams, and then managing these different agreements with industry partners to get the revenue back into restoration. Here's a great example of one of our projects where 30 million board feet were removed in an ecological way in old growth pine. And when the fire came to the bootleg area in the upper basin, Klamath, you could see the results of the area that got treated that we were involved in. So this is that layer of that workforce into these long-term agreements. So we're training programmatic and administrative staff, equipment operators, restoration crews, technical personnel, and then layering in the tribal youth training and employment program. Over to you, Belinda.
Yeah, for the tribal youth training and employment program, this work really is saving lives. We're working in communities with real high risk, multi-generational trauma. So equipping, empowering, training these youth, resource career path is definitely making a difference in these communities. So this slide here is a picture of the Klamath tribes with a Klamath tribal chairman, past Klamath tribal chairman at this point. And there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. The youth that we have coming into these programs and speaking before their council were not the youth that anybody would have bet on to succeed. So our youth crew leaders get training annually, quarterly, whenever we can get them into a good training. We operate under best practices and standardized protocols for positive youth development, and really work on building these crews up for a natural resource career path and the agency, their tribe, and even incubating their own businesses so that they can go out and continue with this work. For some of them, they didn't have any hope. They didn't think anything like this would be possible in their lifetime. Many of our youth cannot afford to go to college and get their degrees in forestry, but in 3 to 5 years training with our technical staff, being out on the ground, they're learning how to do this work and being able to take the departments over in their own tribe.
I'll just close with our one of our keystone projects down in southwestern Oregon. We have black oak as well, which is very important culturally for acorns and subsistence, in addition to our Oregon white oak woodlands. California black oak is a big part of the mix. So our restoration efforts, we're seeing a lot of our legacy trees overtopped by conifers, which is going to require commercial removal in order to save some of these trees. So this iconic site was one of our keystone projects, and we were able to apply for a regional conservation partnership implementation through an implementation strategy that crossed state lines. Lomakatsi sponsored that and worked closely with Klamath Bird Observatory, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NRCS, and our many other partners through CASON. And we were able to implement this work at 4 key sites, what we call ecological recovery islands for oak habitat. And a lot of our stands are accelerated, but we have some very large old trees that are falling apart. So you could see some of the before and after efforts here of crews, very labor intensive, as you know. So tribal workforce down south implementing radial thinning. And we have a large gradient of diversity down in southwestern Oregon that requires a lot of analysis, diversity of prescriptions, and conversation. So the Nature Conservancy has been a key partner on the Table Rocks for many years and developed this oak assessment tool and prioritization. And we've implemented a lot of this work over the years on the Table Rocks and on the adjacent private lands, and really developing that restoration planning around, is it within the functional range? Is it overly dense and uniform? How does that inform our prescriptions? When are we just achieving fuels objectives, and when are we achieving fuels objectives layered with habitat restoration and understory restoration as well? So using those tools and then taking it to the ground level is where we can lay out these projects on a very site-specific level to implement a variable density thinning approach, a retention approach, and engaging closely with our tribal partners for that input, and incorporating indigenous traditional knowledge into restoration silviculture to get this work done on the ground. Some more before and afters, smaller statued oaks that are very old down south, some of the work at the Table Rocks, and then some of our work in with the city of Eugene some years ago required us to administer a helicopter operation due to sensitive soils and teeny plants. So yarding that material, taking those 50-year-old trees and replicating with that stewardship model to regenerate, get some revenue regeneration back so we can do exactly this, get good fire back on the ground, reseed with native grasses, and restore the landscape in that area. So I'm going to stop. There's more slides, but I'm going to pause and turn it back over to you, Lindsay, and I'll leave this fire slide up.
Thank you so much, Marco and Belinda.